everyone, John Henry here, slingshotfutures.com, and welcome to the daily market outlook for the futures markets. This is where we take a look at our big six markets and we formulate an attack method together so we have a plan of attack going into tomorrow's trading day. Now, before we get into the charts, we do have a lot of fun stuff going on for tomorrow, and welcome to March, by the way. Definitely a good welcoming the market gave us. Had a lot of movement today. A little bit choppy, sloppy, but if you were able to capitalize on at least some of the morning movement or some of the afternoon movement, you probably did okay today. I would say maybe an understatement. So now, before we jump into the charts, let's make sure, swing on over to slingshotfutures.com, scroll down, and click on the Join the Daily Outlook newsletter. That will sign you up on our mailing list so you'll be notified every single time one of these comes out, and along with that, knowing when the outlook comes out. We also post all kinds of fun stuff on different stock picks that we may be looking at, fun information, different statistics, or in this case, we'll be talking about the Snap IPO for tomorrow, which will be a very interesting one as well. And along with that, at the bottom of the page in the blog, every single morning we post our live trade room morning prep, and these are the levels for our levels traders that are going to be keeping an eye on the major support and resistance areas throughout the day, and we post those every single morning. So, jumping on into the charts here, we can see the Bund is pretty nice in terms of a downtrend. Fairly solid downward momentum, working its way lower, very nice down pressure. Once we put in a bottom at around that 165 and a little bit below, down to 164.75 was the low, we seem to have kind of stalled out a little bit. Now, the overall momentum, pretty obvious that the buyers, they may be putting up a little bit of a fight down here, but the sellers so far, they own the market. The buyers are able to get above the moving average for a little while, ping around, and then they manage to just find themselves in the cluster area of liquidity, as we saw before, and it is now fading back down. So we are still seeing the sellers trying to hold this market lower. One area that I would love to see is a quick head fake above the highs here. I'm assuming that given that massive failure we saw there, along with the double bottom support, we should find quite a few stops above that 165.15 for sellers to push in for maybe one more leg to the downside. But at the moment, outside of that type of sell, we're kind of winding into a range here. So looking to buy low, sell high, with an emphasis on selling high first, and see if we can get that move down to a new low here on the Bund. Over on the on gold, well, we started off not as good looking as some of the other markets. We have a little bit of a range that started off with a nice drop lower, kind of found a way up, didn't make a new high above that overall nightly high, and then into just a ton of bottoms through here, and definitely a level that you're going to want to keep an eye on. This level is obviously no joke. Regardless of why it's there, there's something happening there because there is a huge amount of volume that is passed on both sides, and the market seems to be respecting that 42.8 level quite a bit. Aside from that, though, the range that we had, we did end up getting a breakdown, a fairly aggressive one with two big pushes, and then they just kind of gave up the ghost all the way back up to the high shortly after the U.S. Open. So with that big rally back up to the opposite end of price, we're looking for where the market is going to want to turn around. If we look for this in the sense of a range, it makes a lot of sense. We're looking to fade the lows, fade the highs, right? Stay out of the middle as you would with any range. And if we look at the overall breakout, the breakout was this big, right? From the low to the low where they broke out to. So we would be looking for a breakout to the upside. Now, in this distance, you could be looking for a break up above the major high, which is going to be the initial measuring point, and that puts resistance at 1255. But you do also have some of these intermediary highs as well, which could act as areas of interest there as well as right there. So lots of different areas above us, but that still leaves an open objective for buyers to push up towards. So we're looking to buy, and I'm looking to buy a pullback. Preferably, if we can get a pullback down to that 47.2 to 46.6 would be a very nice area to become a buyer. We may not be given that opportunity, given how bullish this is and how close we are in terms of proximity to the objectives. If the buyers don't show up soon, we might get that pullback, but I mean, they're already defending that low pretty aggressively. It might only be something like a half back and then a move back up towards the highs. Either way, though, looking to be a buyer on a pullback with major objectives above us, 53.3, 53.9, and 55. Over on the bonds, good old bonds, normally we're talking about range, buy low, sell high, but today we got some pretty good movement. We did start the day off with a range, not much of a surprise there for the European session, but when we started breaking out, they couldn't even retest the lows of that range. Big clue that sellers are taking over, especially when it follows up with a candle that looks like that. and the sellers just slammed this thing to the downside. Now, we do appear to be putting in a little bit of a base here. The buyers are finding some support at around that 149.09 area. All things considered, though, the sellers still dominating in this market, and likely they just want a better price. Nobody wants to sell at the low anymore because we're not getting the follow-through that we were seeing from before, and you can see the base being put in. So because of that, we're looking to sell high in this. If this does transition into a range, it's where you want to be anyway. So I'm going to be looking to sell it around 149.28, possible head fake above the highs for one more attempted push down to the bottom. Now, it may not make it all the way to the bottom because of that support coming in at 10, but, you know, that's kind of what we're looking for. Sell high so we can get one more attempt at the bottom and catch that move and get the buyers kind of stuck out. Over on crude oil, we had inventories today. Very interesting movement. And by interesting, I mean I hope you brought caffeine and a pillow because today was slow. The overnight session looked okay, but even that kind of gave you some clues. It was a mess for a good 3-4 hours. Got some decent movement, and then it went into a range once again for a good hour and a half or so. Got a nice breakout move, and then it went into a range from, well, 4:30 until the inventories came out, and even then the inventory reaction was garbage. So the overall movement on crude oil today was, man, that was a sleeper. It was really tough, choppy, gross trading. Not something generally that you want to be stuck in. We were definitely not looking at crude oil as much today in the room, taking a look at a lot of other markets instead to kind of subsidize the poor quality of setup here on crude. But we do have a breakout to the downside. Overall range, we made a new high, into a new low, into a new high. Double press on the highs. Inventories kind of caused that. And then it just kind of collapsed all the way back down to a new low, and we're forming a little bit of a wedge bottom. We have the low, another low, and now we're trying to break out of the bottom. This is a descending wedge breaking lower. Probability is low for success on something like that to happen. So because of that, we're looking for the market to try to put in a bottom, maybe get a little bit of a bounce, kind of skip around, and then looking for a correction back up in the short term. Now, we are at the lows when we're looking at this in the short term. Always a good idea to check where we are in the big picture. And in the big picture, we're just kind of in a major area of support here as well. Now, we do have some pretty big movement potential to the downside that we may still pick up. There's still obviously a lot of distance that's open space now below us. But this area, we found huge support there. It ended up being support right there, also pinged off it there. And now they're trying it again. And this area is definitely of, you know, something to keep an eye on. Now, one of two things seems to happen around this price between 78 and 72. Either they slam through it and they never look back, like here and here, or like here and here, or we get bouncing like here and here, and potentially here. Now we're kind of getting a mix. We're breaking through that level. We may not come back. Again, it's low probability, but when a low probability scenario does occur, you tend to get another attempted leg on that move. So we get a break down that is low probability of it actually happening and sticking. And if it does, you're going to have more sellers that swarm in realizing, oh, well, that actually worked. Wait a minute, let's go for another leg down to get that next level of support. So at the moment, we are breaking down, and I don't anticipate probability-wise that this actually succeeds to the downside. But if you start seeing this break away, be warned, we may be in for another drop here on crude oil before we start seeing the buyers come back in. So looking to sell at the moment at a better price unless we really get a breakout. Otherwise, potentially even looking to buy in the short term for a bounce. On the NASDAQ, and the same really can be said about the S&P, we have a rip of a day. Huge movement to the upside here on all of the indices. Very nice movement. And that's why we were talking about if you were able to catch the afternoon session, you had a pretty good time because, man, this movement is nothing to be upset about. That's for sure. Well, unless you missed it, I suppose that would be kind of upsetting. But the overall movement is bullish, right? We started off the morning kind of bullish in sentiment, but they took a lot of it back, and then we got this, right? 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock and going into 4 o'clock, big breakout movement. And when that started kicking off, I mean, look how many candles back to back on that string of movement up were bullish, right? There was one little doji inside there, another little one right there, but that's it. There were no bear candles from pretty much 3 to 4 o'clock, a full hour of just straight bullishness. So with that amount of bullish pressure, we get a pullback into the moving average, and the buyers just swarmed all over it, slammed it back up again. We start coming towards the U.S. session, and we're kind of range-bound here a little bit. And the U.S. session sees a little bit of selling, probably from buyers that were in down here. But once the sellers showed up, where did they go, right? All they managed to do is find a level of support down here and bounced right back up again. Huge bullish strength, get a little bit of a flag pullback here, and another rocket ship to the upside. So just a phenomenal day of trading here on the NASDAQ and pretty much all of the indices. You just had to be patient, let the sellers get out of the way, get them trapped, if anything, and then shove those stops right down their throats, right back to the upside. Beautiful momentum, but we appear to be a little bit overdone. Right, we slammed through the top of the channel. They gave it another shot, and actually several attempts up here. 1, 2, and then 3. Bigger failure right there. And likely a lot of buyers, after they saw this and this, looked at the trade and said, you know what? I've been in from here, I've been in from here, I bought here, or whatever. And we've seen this double top kind of failure around another area of resistance already. If it comes back, I'm just going to get out of the trade and call it a day. And that seems to be what a lot of folks did. So, anticipating this to be more of a profit-taking run to the downside, we are in support at 53.85 half, but that said, we do have that breakout to the upside of the channel, so I'm looking for a correction to the downside and possibly even a breakout through the bottom where we can then find more support to push higher. We definitely don't want to ignore the support at 53.85 half, but it definitely, wouldn't be a surprise to see it maybe take a little bit of a dip lower. 53.6875 or so in that area would look pretty nice for potential buying pressure and the buyers stepping back up to the plate on an overshot of the bottom. And then finally on the S&P, something you don't see very frequently, but you do get every once in a while on those big runaway days, we have a quad-tiered channel, right? We have 3 different locations on this channel forming 4 different levels of support and resistance. We've got 1, 2, and 3. And really, that was all found off of this initial channel. You draw that first one up and you draw a deviation higher, fits perfectly inside here. They even found a little bit of support. Draw another deviation higher, fits perfectly here as well. So we have a quad-tiered channel working its way higher, and again, we're getting the correction. The buyers who bought all the way up, arguably, the S&P is more aggressively bullish on the upside. They bought down here, down here, down here. All of the pullbacks assumed that the buyers swarmed the thing like crazy, and once they made it back up to the highs, they found a double top. All of the buyers gave up the ghost when they couldn't get it again, and they took all of their profits, and now we're seeing the pullback. Same kind of scenario, right? We definitely have support right around that last time that the buyers showed up at that 95.25, but looking for an overall larger correction does make a lot of sense. We don't have that overzealousness because it's a quad-tiered channel, but if you only focus on the one channel that started it, we have a massive overshoot on the highs. But we are approaching the main channel, right? That's kind of the primary, the mother channel, if you will. So one that started everything. So we may find a little bit of support here, some buyers trying to accumulate more of a buy position, but I would really like to see a dip down to that 89.25, maybe even down to 86 or so to look to buy and then push the market right back up. As a side note, for all of you who are big fans of kind of interesting information, we hit 2,400, right? That is a big, big level. Whenever you're talking about those big levels, 2,400, 2,500, 2,000, right? Those big levels, they tend to have a lot of back and forth, and that's what we saw here today. We hit 2,400, and a huge amount of profit taking took place up there, causing a little bit of a dip lower. So that's going to do it for the overall kind of look at the markets. Tomorrow, we don't have any big U.S. news. We have some news coming out that would be considered big, but that's going to be for the pound, the euro, and the Canadian dollar. Nothing really big to keep an eye on for the U.S. session. And after a U.S. session like today, we may just end up having tomorrow be a range anyway. So be careful going into tomorrow. It might be kind of a slow, choppy one. And then for you stock traders, we have a couple different looks at few stocks that are kind of hitting the interest meter for us. One of them is going to be Snap. Snapchat is launching the IPO tomorrow. Seems to be they priced it around $17 to $18 a share. Tomorrow will be the first day of trading for that. Again, all of that information is in the newsletter, so make sure you sign up for that if you haven't already. But that's going to do it for this one. So as we always say, make a plan, trade that plan, follow those rules, and you will be A-okay. Until next time, have a good one.